Autumn Sword. The artist formerly and recently known as J.D. Sword is a columnist for Skeptical Inquirer magazine and a contributing writer for its sister publication, Free Inquiry. She also writes for the website AIPT Science, where she provides a skeptical analysis of pop cultural references to the infernal. Autumn focuses on historical and contemporary cases of exorcism and demonic possession, the history and practice of superstition, magic, and witchcraft, as well as urban legends and conspiracy theories related to pseudo-Satanism and devil worship. Autumn is the host of the Devil in the Details podcast and is a proud member of the Church of Satan. Welcome back, Autumn.
Oh, there we go. Thank you very much for having me.
Yeah, thanks for coming back. I am super excited for this talk. As I mentioned earlier, I definitely have vivid memories of the Satanic Panic, and I am so excited to dig in and learn more about it from a different perspective than the one that I was getting at the time it was happening.
All right. If everybody's ready, then we'll go ahead and dive in. All right. So I'm a scientific skeptic and a member of the Church of Satan. And the beginning of my involvement in writing for Skeptical Inquirer and working through my podcast to educate the public on science and Satanism was in 2016, the whole Pizzagate thing. And when that happened, I kind of had an intuition that the whole QAnon thing was going to just get bigger. And I unfortunately was not entirely wrong, because even after Trump lost the election in 2020 and the apocalyptic storm that was supposed to happen where he would publicly execute all the members of the deep state, which, for those who don't know, supposedly run the country and are, satanic pedophiles, uh, all passed, and the communication from Q ceased. And even so, there are still people that believe in the core idea of the movement, that the deep state is real and they need to protect children from those, that the deep state runs the financial institutions and the media and the government, essentially, as an Illuminati-like cabal. And the QAnon movement was never really defined, but it's kind of become more so since Trump lost. So more and more people now will not necessarily identify explicitly with the name, but the ideas are still there. And a lot of those kind of conspiracy theories have unfortunately been adopted by the Republican Party. But even so, even though people aren't spending all their time trying to decrypt these posts from Q, their numbers are still growing. There was a poll conducted by the Public Religion Research Institute that indicated that the number of people who identify with some core aspects of the conspiracy theory has grown from 14 to 17% of Americans, and that's after Trump lost the 2020 election. So clearly this is a problem that it's not going away. And we need to kind of think about how are we going to deal with that, since it's not just going to leave us alone. And sadly, that's not something that should be surprising, because these ideas have persisted long before QAnon and they predate the internet. We can trace them all the way back to the Satanic Panic of the 80s and 90s, which, is mostly what we're going to talk about tonight. But you can even go further back to the witch trials of the early modern period. Belief in child sacrificing, devil worshipping cults is a very old moral panic. And just in case there are some people that don't quite know what a moral panic is defined as, maybe have kind of a vague notion about it, but specifically it was defined, and the phrase was coined by sociologist Stanley Cohen in 1972, and he said, a condition, episode, person, or group emerges to become defined as a threat to society. And part of the nature of that threat even if it is somewhat legitimate, it's going to be sensationalized and blown out of proportion by the media. And you're going to have socially accredited experts who are going to come forward and offer their solutions to the problem. And eventually the threat will either disappear and be kind of forgotten, except in folklore and the collective memory of society, or it's going to have long-lasting consequences. And in the case of the Satanic Panic, that's very much so, since we're still dealing with it today. So kind of a quick and easy example that I would use for other moral panics would be, you kind of have the drug and sex scares behind the campy films like Reefer Madness, or Devil's Harvest. I don't know if anybody's ever seen those. They're really, really funny exploitation style films. But they were originally created as very serious warnings about these kind of problems. Another example would be, in the 80s with the AIDS epidemic, there was kind of a big homophobic scare, which even today, with the kind of problems that we see with trying to ban drag in public and the kind of transphobia around gender expression, it all kind of ties in together.
So
So
going back to your first definition by Cohen there. So I've never really thought of the Holocaust as being caused by a moral panic, but by that it would fit that definition.
yeah, so I mean, with the Holocaust, that's kind of just in some ways the culmination of centuries of pogroms and ideas that were percolating around Europe and Germany. That's part of the reason why, to some extent, it was so, the Nazi regime was kind of so successful, because those resentments were already there. So there was a historical precedent that they could draw on, especially when it came to kind of crafting the mythology of the Aryan race. So how exactly did we get to where we are today? So if you go all the way back to the dawn of Christianity, what you find is that the Romans were kind of freaked out by this weird Jewish sect that talked about eating their founder's body and drinking his blood. They would meet in secret to avoid persecution, and it soon became morphed into the idea that the Christians were practicing cannibalism and they were eating babies, and they were meeting in these cemeteries at night, not because they were necessarily trying to escape persecution, but just because they were kind of up to no good. And after the first 1,000 years, when Christianity became the official religion of the Roman Empire, Christians started accusing Jews of these very same things. That's where the idea of the blood libel comes from, that Jews are sacrificing Christian babies to prepare the ritual matzah for Passover. And eventually Christians also kind of turned on themselves and started accusing other groups of being heretics, not being true Christians, or not being Christians in the right kind of way. And over hundreds of years, this eventually turned into the idea of the witch, that there was a organized group of devil worshippers who were using magic to bewitch children, to cause misfortune upon their neighbors, what was known as maleficia. And part of that was also that they were cannibalizing children. They were eating children, or they were sacrificing children, or they were using parts of children, like baby fat, for example, to prepare things like their ritual candles. So fast forwarding from early modern period, we're going to jump into the 1970s, the age of Aquarius. And America's youth are turning on, tuning in, and dropping out, and they're leaving their parents' religion and values, which are largely Christian, behind, and they're joining these various what's known as new religious movements, like transcendental meditation. You have the Hare Krishnas, which I don't know if they're really a thing anymore, but even from watching like movies from like the 70s and 80s, you can see a lot of kind of visual jokes revolve around the Hare Krishnas in the background. And of course, I would be remiss to not mention the Church of Satan. So as this is all happening, you also have this stark decline in Christian affiliation. Less people are going to church and less people are self-identifying as Christians. So much to the point that in April 1966, Times Magazine ran a cover that asked, "Is God dead?" And, in the same month, Anton LaVey founds the Church of Satan, and eventually in the Satanic Bible goes on and answers the question, well, if God's not dead, he better have Medicare. So I'm all for less Christianity. This is all great and wonderful. But understandably, there was some backlash from conservative Christians who felt that their hegemony was slipping away. They were losing kind of their place in society as the tastemakers. So in part, this ended up manifesting through a fear that the youth were running away to join these cults and they were being brainwashed into becoming murderous communist sleeper agents, like Manchurian candidates. And, on the face of it, that seems ridiculous. But bear in mind, you had the Manson family in 1969. That was all over the news. And 10 years later, you had Jim Jones and the mass suicide of the People's Temple. So while these things weren't happening on the scale that everyone was afraid of, they also weren't entirely impossible. So in addition to this kind of anti-cult atmosphere, this scare over these new religious movements, evangelical Christians were also directly working to try to claw back some of that lost power and influence. So you see things like the Trinity Broadcasting Network ends up being founded in 1973. Jerry Falwell's Moral Majority in 1978, trying to bring Christian influence directly into American politics, which we continue to see today with things like Project 2025 and Christian nationalism. And meanwhile, there was this movement that started spreading around the country, originating in California, where the hippies and young people were kind of turning away from the drugs and the mysticism, and they were converting back to Christianity. Specifically, they would often claim to have this almost psychedelic experience referred to as the baptism of the Holy Spirit. So it came to be known as the Jesus movement, and these people were somewhat pejoratively referred to as the Jesus freaks. If you've ever heard that phrase thrown around about somebody that's kind of a bit of a holy roller, it originates from this time period.
We had
A
Dave
lot of these,
Warnock as a speaker, and he proudly calls himself a Jesus freak from the time.
yeah,
So
yeah. I
he
mean,
wore that as a badge of honor.
yeah, kind of like owning up to it. And a lot of what they were about was kind of getting out there and testifying about this very personal kind of experience that they had. So like I said, they were a lot of ex-hippies, so they would try to talk about how they left this kind of sinful lifestyle behind, the drugs, the sex, the dabbling in the occult, and that was part of their sales tactic, that they found God and they turned all their life around. There's this old joke about somebody who used to be like an alcoholic, used to be a drug addict, and they would talk about like, I used to be all messed up on alcohol, and now I'm messed up on the Lord. Uh, um, and one of the more kind of ridiculous examples of these sales tactics that they would use, there were these evangelical preachers, Mike Cerullo and like this gentleman here featured here, Herschel Smith, who they bought this bus and they converted it into this like traveling museum of the occult that they called the Witchmobile. And they would tour the country and would give lectures telling people about the dangers of witchcraft. And, they would have all these kind of artifacts and stuff. And people speaking about how they used to be part of witches' covens and satanic cults and stuff, and then, converted and saw the light. And one of the most successful of these Jesus freaks who actually was involved in the creation of the Witchmobile was America's #1 Christian comedian, Mike Warnke. And that was actually how he was billed. And it was probably because he was probably America's #1 Christian comedian, because Christianity's not that funny. They don't really have much of a sense of humor, in my experience. So his shtick was he would come up and he was a stand-up comedian. He would tell these jokes, and then he would kind of intersperse the comedy with these lurid stories of how he used to be a high priest of the satanic cult, and he would kill people. They ran drugs, raped girls, and drank blood. And he co-authored a 1972 book called The Satan Seller, with a couple of the other individuals that were responsible for the Witchmobile. And it supposedly talks about his life and how he used to be involved in the cult, and then found Jesus and, turned his life around. And needless to say, everything in the book is bullshit. It's demonstrably false. There were two journalists, Mike Trott and something, I think John Hertenstein, and they were writers for a Christian magazine called Cornerstone, and they published this big expose on him, which later got turned into a book called Selling Satan. And I highly recommend it if you can pick it up and read it. It's fascinating how much detail they went into, like every minute detail of the claims that he made, they pretty much thoroughly debunk. But for years, people really believed his story, and he had a minute, he made a lot of money as a comedian selling records, VHS tapes, whatever, of his comedy. He had a ministry for a while that was, taking in big bucks. And his story and his, as he would tell it in the book and through his act, really helped legitimize this idea that these cults were real. And seemingly innocuous things like astrology and tarot reading weren't just harmless fun. They were pretty much gateway drugs to this more serious, satanic activity. Now, while all this was happening, there's a development in the world of psychiatry that kind of ends up being the last piece to this puzzle. So through the 70s and the 80s, thanks a lot to the second wave of feminism, you have society's collective understanding of issues like child abuse and incest changing. Up until then, you could pretty much, beat the shit out of your kids and nobody cared. And incest was treated as this freaky thing that happened, but not very often. And we're not really going to talk about it because it's icky. But after feminism, attitudes about what you could and couldn't do to kids changed, and the idea became that incest was actually a much more prevalent problem than was previously believed. So what started to happen was you would have psychiatrists treating adult survivors of incest, and they noticed that a lot of their patients were reluctant to talk about it. And rather than accepting that, there's a certain shame and stigma that's attached to it, they came to believe that the reason their patients wouldn't discuss it or would actively deny that it had happened was that they couldn't remember that it happened, was that the trauma was so great, their brain repressed the memories of what had happened into the unconscious, where it would stay safely locked away until they started almost poisoning their body and their mind with symptoms that would prompt them to go to seek a psychiatrist to help them recover these memories. And eventually anyone who came into therapy for, any kind of problems, depression, insomnia, problems with forming meaningful relationships, pretty much anything under the sun, a psychiatrist would come to suspect that the reason for these symptoms manifesting was that the patient was a victim of childhood abuse. And the more the patients would deny it, I mean, the more they were considered to be in denial, and psychiatrists would kind of double down on the idea that, we have to work at this to kind of get to the truth. And the two threads of the kind of social fear of cults and alternative religions and this belief in repressed memories converges in 1980 with the publication of this book, Michelle Remembers, which a really excellent documentary came out last year on this called Satan Wants You. I highly, highly recommend it because they really go into interviewing people who've never before spoken on this, and they have actual kind of transcripts of these therapy sessions. It's a really fascinating movie. I can't recommend it enough. Um, Once this book kind of hit shelves, that's when the Satanic Panic began proper. So the book sells itself as being a factual memoir of this titular Michelle Proby. She's referred to as Smith in the book, and how she uncovered repressed memories of childhood abuse while undergoing hypnosis by her psychiatrist Lawrence Pasder. Both of them are here pictured in the book. And Pastor himself was a devout Catholic who had an interest in Native African religions and kind of black magic. And there's no way that's going to have any bearing on the content of the hypnosis during the hypnosis sessions that he has with Michelle. And I should also mention that Pastor and Michelle, through the course of their therapy, divorced their partners and married each other. So, he married his patient. There couldn't possibly be a conflict of interest there.
That seems
But
a little bit
Big
unethical. Did he
yikes.
lose his license?
no. Actually, he went on to become much lauded as an expert for the work that he did here. And I mean, the book itself was very financially successful. They got a 100,000 advance for a hardcover copy, 242,000 for the paperback rights. There was they were in talks to do a movie, I think with Dustin Hoffman set to star as Lawrence Pasder. And they went on this big lecturing tour across the country to promote the book. And after that, because of its success, he ended up being treated as an expert in ritual abuse, and he would give lectures to law enforcement and other kind of psychiatric symposiums. And it was actually at one of those in Richmond in 1987 that he coined this term satanic ritual abuse, which he defined as repeated physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual assaults combined with a systematic use of symbols and secret ceremonies designed to turn a child against itself, family, society, and God. And the importance of this book can't be overestimated. It became a blueprint for cases of recovered memories across the country. There was a veritable explosion of cases of recovered memories of satanic ritual abuse. It went on to inspire several copycat books. Pasder and Michelle ended up getting themselves involved in the McMartin trial, which we'll kind of touch on a little bit in a minute, as experts talking to the parents and stuff of the children that were interviewed. So yeah, and in the first print of the book, Pasder specifically refers to the Church of Satan as being the group responsible for Michelle's abuse. And that, of course, led to a lawsuit brought against him and the publishers by Anton LaVey and the legal representation for the Church of Satan, basically saying that, it was slander or libel. And the way that case went was really interesting because there was kind of this back and forth where, on the one hand, the book very overtly treated itself as being a factual account of events. They even went so far as to go to the Vatican to try to get bishops and stuff to basically endorse the account. And there's a couple quotes in the book from a Bishop Remy DeRue and another individual where the Catholic Church kind of leaves the door open. They don't want to necessarily put their seal of their stamp of approval on it, but they don't want to necessarily say that it's totally bogus either. And in the documentary Satan Wants You, there's a lot more. There's a recorded conversation with the bishop, and it goes a lot more into the detail of how much the Catholic Church kind of bankrolled this book's publication and how involved they were in kind of pushing it, for their own interests. But with respect to the lawsuit, it presents itself as being factual, and Pazder's legal defense was, well, it's not really factual. These are just kind of memories that, maybe they happened, so they can't really be used as evidence, against somebody's reputation in court. And, even if that was the case, Anton LaVey already, presents himself as the leader of this Church of Satan. So he's already besmirched his reputation. This book couldn't do any more damage. But anyway, regardless, in subsequent printings, that part was taken out. But, by then, the damage was done. There came to be an explosion of people with recovered memories and ex-Satanists like Mike Warnke coming forward. And I think, some of these people were genuinely mentally ill, or they were being manipulated by stronger personalities with something to gain, because this came to be a very easy way to get your 15 minutes of fame. People love to be scared and they love to be outraged, so the more lurid the story you can run, the better. And TV networks and studio execs could certainly smell the ratings. Every TV talk show, Oprah, Sally Jesse Raphael, Geraldo Rivera, ran some kind of special. They would have these people on to talk about the dangers of satanic cults. One of the most watched being 1985's ABC 2020 program special, The Devil Worshippers, which had Lawrence Pazder and Mike Warnke both on as kind of experts testifying about it. So all of this made for really good TV, but there were actual repercussions for the people who were wrapped up in these accusations and the people who came to believe that they themselves were victims. Adults had their entire lives turned upside down, their relationships, their reputations were destroyed. And if they didn't have PTSD, if the people that thought they had recovered memories of abuse didn't have PTSD before, they certainly did after coming out of therapy. And it was even worse for the children who got dragged into these panics, because they were being exposed to, all these kind of horrible ideas and accusations, and would end up being pretty much hounded by police and social workers and their families into confessing that these horrible things happened. And of course, the people who were accused of abusing these kids, they lost their livelihoods, they had their reputations destroyed. And in some cases, if it was family members who were accused of ritualistically abusing other family members, tore families apart. And, of course, kind of the ultimate consequence, people went to jail. One of the most infamous cases, as we mentioned earlier, was the daycare scandal of the McMartin preschool, the McMartin trial in Manhattan Beach. And that trial dragged on for 7 years and ended up costing costing taxpayers about $15 million. And in the end, the couple were exonerated, but that was 7 years of their life gone, and they lost their livelihood. And, of course, they weren't ever going to be able to open up another preschool again. Another daycare example was that of Dan and Fran Keller, who actually were found guilty, and they ended up spending 21 years in prison and were only just released, I think, back in 2013. And then not a daycare case, but there was a Texas man named Melvin Quinney, whose kids accused him of satanically abusing them, and he ended up going to prison. But years later, his kids recanted, saying that their mother, who they were going through a divorce at the time, their mother and the psychiatrists and social workers that kind of interviewed them had coerced them into making these accusations. So Quinney ended up being released early, but he had to register as a sex offender. So he was carrying that stigma around for 30 years. He was only just exonerated last year. So, needless to say, there's absolutely no evidence of these satanic conspiracies. There's no underground tunnels that they're using to traffic children that have ever been found. There's no evidence of these nocturnal meetings, no human remains that have ever been dug up. And they've tried. There was a story, and I can't remember where it was, but there was a sheriff who kind of made a big name for himself because he had this big excavation going on, convinced that they were going to find these hundreds and hundreds of human remains related to cult activity. And, of course, all this land was dug up and nothing was found. But the big question that kind of remains is, can traumatic memories of abuse actually be repressed? There's no physical evidence of these cults, but what about the memories of the abuse? Are they true? Are they real? And decades of research by individuals like Elizabeth Loftus, pictured here, I absolutely love her, and journalists like Richard Offshee have all concluded that the answer is no. There's never been explained or demonstrated a mechanism by which encoded memories can be done in such a way that they are repressed. And we don't need, even if it was the case that repression could be true, although we don't have an explanatory mechanism, the kind of natural functions of memory are sufficient to explain what people's experiences are. Children who are abused may not be able to conceptualize what's happening to them as abuse, or they may normalize it as a coping mechanism, as some adults do in abusive relationships, rather than face the reality of being trapped in an abusive relationship with a partner that, doesn't actually love or care about you. You kind of normalize their behavior, rationalizing what happens. So with that said, you might go on not thinking about these kind of events for long periods of time. By comparison, something that is experienced as overwhelmingly traumatic is very, very difficult to forget. That's kind of the key feature of PTSD. The problem is that people who suffer from that can't forget about it. We also know that memory is largely a reconstructive process. Your brain does not record what happens to you like a photograph or a video. Memory is subject to distortion and factual errors. So, and when we're in a kind of traumatic or stressful situation, the way that our brain encodes memories is also impacted. Our amygdala activity increases while the activity of our hippocampus, which is responsible for encoding memories, decreases. So our memories are more fragmented and less accurate than we would like to believe. And our brain.
I got to interview Elizabeth at PsyCon, I think it was 2019, and I
Oh
asked
man,
some
that would have been
questions
awesome.
about our experiments, and it's quite amazing. I mean, I knew a little bit about it, but just in the 5 minutes I had, the things she told me about experiments where people are shown doctored photographs of their childhood, like
Mm-hmm.
vacations they took with their family. All right, so one's Disney World, one's they're in a hot air balloon with their parents, one's there somewhere else, at a national park, and one of them is just totally made up.
Mm-hmm.
And by seeing the picture and then talking about it, they actually can, something like half of people will come to believe that that actually happened to them. And then that memory that is essentially constructed just by that
Mm-hmm.
false bit of information is just as real going forward to them as anything that actually happened. It is quite
Yeah.
astounding.
Yeah. There's another one that she did. I forget exactly what the procedure was, but basically they created a scenario in which the participants came to believe that they had a childhood experience where they were lost in like a grocery store.
Yeah, she told me about a shopping mall. Yeah.
Yeah. And, of course, they had kind of checked out to make sure that never actually happened. But, the scary thing is once these kind of what are known as false memories are created, like you said, they're just as real and feel just as vivid as the real thing. Um, and when you have situations where someone is in especially when you have situations where someone is in an altered state of consciousness, so you're undergoing hypnosis or you're under a significant amount of stress, and you're getting the kind of reinforcement and suggestions from uh, figures like a psychiatrist, or one of the big problems in Richard Offshe's book, Making Monsters, they discuss that a lot of these kind of survivors of ritual abuse and recovered memories would kind of form support groups where they would, mutually reinforce one another's beliefs. And in those kind of contexts, whether intentional or not, there's a certain kind of peer pressure that comes out. And, if you have kind of a more hazy, vague, fragmented memory, you're in a position where you're very easily susceptible to suggestions from others, and you kind of end up co-opting some of the details of their memories. So
This connects with me to the current thing, which is in the news a lot. It's about UFO believers. There was a podcast I watched the other day, and there were 4 or 5 people on there, all believed they were abductees. They call them experiencers. They were all taken by alien. They're all talking about it like it's real. And, anyone who disagrees with that is a disinformation for the agent for the U.S. government.
the shill excuse.
Yep.
Carl Sagan in his what is it, Candle in the Dark?
Carl Sagan, yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
actually had a brief, very, very brief kind of comparison between the alien abduction phenomena and um, the ritual abuse scare.
Ah, yeah, it does sound similar.
And there was something kind of similar too with respect to animal mutilations. You know, when they first kind of started making the news in the 70s, there was more of a concern about alien abductions or secret government projects that were leaving these mutilated animal remains. And then once you get into the 80s and you have this scare about satanic cults, then it becomes, oh well, these are the remains of ritual sacrifices. So it's interesting how similar phenomena in different kind of contexts can be interpreted differently, and really kind of reflects more of what is society's boogeyman at the moment.
Yeah, and the connection to people who believe they've been abducted, especially people who've been abducted from their bedrooms. There's the thing about the succubus, right? It used to be some kind of demonic thing which was doing these things. And then in the more modern times, it more likely becomes aliens who are doing it.
And I have to, just as an aside, I'm very disappointed because I always was waiting for something like that to happen to me. Or like, I remember seeing an advertisement for uh I think it was Tales of the Crypt Bordello of Blood movie in like the 90s. And I remember being like, oh yeah, like hot vampires are gonna come into my room, and that never happened. But
Why can't
that
it be like that SNL skit where that one person is recalling the experience and she's like, yeah, let me tell you, and then this happened and I was into it, and everyone's else like is like traumatized, and she's like, no, I'm for it, this is fine. Where's that person?
right. But that kind of goes back to the idea of also being in an altered state of mind, and especially with it being a lot of these cases happening uh, at night, in bed, or even behind the wheel, with people being prone to like nodding off while they're driving. It also kind of brings up the idea of like night terrors and sleep paralysis. So like speaking from personal experience, I have had occasions of sleep paralysis, and one of the kind of first times that it happened, I awoke in the middle of the night and there was this kind of black menacing shape at the foot of my bed, which, at the time, of course, was terrifying because you can't move. But the thing is, I'm a lifelong metalhead, and at the time, I was really getting into Black Sabbath. I picked up a bunch of old cassette tapes from a garage sale and was really getting into Black Sabbath. And there was specifically a story about drummer Bill Ward having an experience like that and then writing the title track of their album Black Sabbath. So, I was kind of primed to have that kind of experience in my mind. So, did that influence what I saw or how I interpreted the experience? Maybe. If I had been someone who was more interested in extraterrestrials or more willing to believe in the existence of extraterrestrials, maybe I would have believed that there were grays at the end of my bed and they were like, going to take me back up to the mothership. Who knows?
It definitely is the Greys who are the ones who do that. If you've ever seen the series, the short run series, People of Earth, it's a bunch of aliens working together. Every alien conspiracy is correct in that show, and it's a comedy, like The Office meets The X-Files. And it's the Greys who are the ones who do those sorts of things. Watch out for the Greys.
So, with that said, it should be no surprise that satanic cult conspiracies are harmful. But I'd also like to touch on how dangerous the people themselves who believe these theories can be. So I mentioned Pizzagate when we first started discussing this. And for those who don't know, in 2016, this guy Edgar Madison Welch came to believe these crazy conspiracies that like Hillary Clinton and George Soros were somehow running a child trafficking cult out of this pizzeria. Comet, it was Comet Ping Pong. I think it was in Las Vegas. But basically, he went to this pizzeria with like an AK, or not an AK-47, but like an AR-15 style rifle, thinking that he was going to liberate these kids that were like locked up in the basement. And lo and behold, the pizzeria didn't even have a basement. And then there was the story of the guy who killed his two kids with a fishing spear gun because he believed that he was saving them from his wife, presumably ex-wife, who was a reptilian. But so those are kind of two of the more famous cases, but it's not just those isolated cases, and it's not just a US thing either. So I recently wrote about these two individuals who are activists in the UK, one being Jeanette Archer, who runs a support group on Facebook supporting satanic ritual abuse survivors. And back in like 2019, 2020, she was holding these rallies in London, calling the royal family reptilians and talking about how there was this terrible anti-Semitic conspiracy that the Rothschilds ruled the world, and the Judaism is the Antichrist. All this kind of terrible anti-Semitic crap that we've all heard a million times before. But then in 2022, her and her boyfriend ended up being arrested by Thames police on suspicion to commit murder, which ultimately they were let go. And then in February, she was arrested again, I think on suspicion of encouraging someone to commit suicide. But if that wasn't scary enough, this other activist, the gentleman here on the left in the black shirt, Wilfred Wong, back in 2020, he, along with 6 others, ended up being arrested for kidnapping a foster child at knife point and trying to traffic them out of the country because they came to believe that the father was a Satanist and was abusing this kid. And the evidence that they presented in their defense was they thought this based on drawings that the child had made. So thank goodness the child was not harmed. He was recovered by the police, and these scumbags ended up going to jail. But the harm was already done. The father had said that he continued to be harassed online by friends and supporters of Wong, called a Satanist, and that his relationship with his child was kind of irreparably harmed. So that's all kind of bad that this stuff is still happening. So let's try to look on the bright side. What kind of glimmer of hope can we present? Well, a lot of people will say about the satanic panic is still going on, or are we going through a second satanic panic? And I would say things today aren't the same as they were back then, and that's a good thing. We're not, in fact, living through a second satanic panic. And part of the reason is because there's not the kind of mainstream media support that these conspiracies had back in the day. QAnon related content still makes the news, but the narrative is kind of overwhelmingly that these people are kind of nuts, and the stories are more along the lines of, wow, can you believe that these people actually believe this? And second, part of that, there's not really anyone who presents themselves as experts anymore that can kind of go out in front of the public and convince people that these beliefs are based in fact. There are still kind of minor celebrities in the community, like the aforementioned Jeanette Archer, who runs these kind of online support groups. But there's no kind of professional ex-Satanists or ex-baby breeders that are coming out with their stories. I mean, she certainly believes that, and has a lot of other kooky beliefs, but it's kind of just isolated to the community of people that follow her online. There's no cult cops giving seminars. So it's much harder for the general public to kind of believe that these conspiracies are based in fact. And kind of as a result of that, finally, I would argue there's a lot more skepticism in general of these kind of claims today than there ever was before, because the media networks aren't endorsing it. And part of the reason is because they know they might get egg on their face if they kind of lean too far into this, and then the story ends up kind of being disproven or shown to be unsubstantiated. And we also have a better understanding of how things like false memories can be created and what kind of more plausible alternatives to these satanic ritual abuse accusations might be available. Now, unfortunately, that still leaves us the problem of people falling down the rabbit hole of these conspiracies. And we're lucky that things didn't go worse than they did. We had someone like Marjorie Taylor Greene, who's a senator and who's very publicly endorsed QAnon related posts and content before. Donald Trump, of course, has likewise shared and supported conspiracy theories as they kind of, help make him look good, or at least look good to the people that for some reason like him. But if more people who believed these kind of things got access to those levers of power, who knows what might happen? So what can we do about it? Well, first and foremost, I would say the most important thing is to get involved. Don't be afraid to question people's beliefs, as long as you do it in a respectful way. You don't have to be a dick to just ask, well, how do you know that? And by opening that kind of dialogue, you can see where the question goes. And I think that trying is better than kind of just having the attitude of, well, it's not my problem, because these people are inclined to make it your problem if you let them. Second, there might be valid concerns behind what these people believe, even if the beliefs themselves are, ludicrous. And if you acknowledge that, you can establish a kind of common ground with them. And I think there'll be a better chance of them listening, of there being a reciprocal listening to each other rather than one person talking at the other, or shutting down altogether. Child exploitation and trafficking is a very real problem. And Jeffrey Epstein was really providing kids to wealthy people and politicians and celebrities. That doesn't mean that they're all part of a satanic cult, but there was certainly a conspiracy going on. Third, I would say try to get people to break the connection they have to however they are being enmeshed in conspiracy land. So, for a lot of people, it's probably through their phones, either through social media or things like TikTok. It's been demonstrably shown that algorithms will drive users towards more and more extreme content, which may lead them to becoming more and more radicalized. And unfortunately, algorithms aren't going away. So we've got to find some way of getting people to unplug, of giving them reasons to get away. Whether that's, finding a hobby or getting involved in some kind of community service, something that can give you that good brain juice. The saying is go outside and touch some grass. Something that can give you a real kind of human connection. And a lot of people say, that's why things like QAnon and other conspiracy theories really kind of flourished during the pandemic, was because you didn't have that one-on-one interpersonal contact. People were kind of isolated online and basically at the mercy of whatever content they're consuming and how the algorithm chooses to, herd them along. Finally, and probably most controversially, I would say stop supporting organizations and activist groups that use satanic themed imagery to get media and public attention. Regardless of the intent, the effect that these publicity stunts have is to affirm what Christians already believe. So monuments are proof of satanic infiltration of government. Abortion rituals are proof of child sacrifice. And satanic school clubs are proof that Satanists are indoctrinating their children. If you want to maintain separation of church and state, guarantee access to birth control and defend science education in schools, there are already secular organizations that fight to do that. You don't need to slap a pitchfork and horns on it. Arson and terrorism are objectively bad. They're never justified. But when you go out of your way to provoke a reaction from a group that historically are hostile, and they have a history of doing things like bombing abortion clinics or, burning witches at the stake, it doesn't make it right, but you can't be surprised when they try to blow up your house. And doing these kind of things validates the fears and anxieties that they already have. And in so doing that, you are creating the conditions for the possibilities of another satanic panic. And, that's certainly something that I don't want. I have a personal vested interest in these people leaving me alone. I have kind of put myself out there through Center for Skeptical Inquiry. But, my work is kind of my own, and I would stand behind secular organizations and kind of work through them and let them kind of fight the good fight rather than try to turn it into some kind of overtly satanic crusade, because I'm already not their favorite person. I don't want to give them more of a reason to knock on my door. I actually did, and I don't get a lot of like fundy messages, but I did have somebody message me, and it was hello, can I talk to you about Jesus? And I kind of just, no, thank you. And thankfully that was it, that the conversation ended there. But I am always kind of afraid that they're not going to be that polite. So if there's any message that I can kind of leave people with, I would say, if you're not already supporting science and reason by, supporting organizations like Secular Rescue, Center for Inquiry, please do so. If you want to read more of my stuff, you can check it out at skepticalinquirer.org. The column that I write for is called The Devil in the Details. If you want to check out my podcast of the same name, very creative, you can find it on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, I think pretty much anywhere there's, podcast services. If you want more of the kind of pop culture related takes on Satanism and like demonic possession as it's featured in movies and TV shows, you can go to AIPT Comics, and that's where I'd like to leave things at.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for that. I cannot wait to read
Oh,
more of your content. I have enjoyed quite a bit of it on the Skeptical
thank you.
Inquiry website and can't wait to see more. We're also getting some people wondering if they can see a copy of the slide deck from tonight. Is that something that you share, or would you prefer to refer people to a different source for if they want references?
No, I can, if they want to, I don't know, if they want to leave like their email address or something, I can email it to them because it's
If you want
current.
to if you want to share it with me, I can send it to people if they
Okay,
email me at the RfRx at
sure.
recoveringfromreligion.org. We can do it that way too. You're welcome to share your contact information as well, but you certainly don't need to.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, if anybody wants to message me, you can find the Devil in the Details page on Facebook, or you can look up Autumn Sword on Facebook. If you want to send me an email, it's sword, G is in golf, E is in echo, R is in Romeo, A is in alpha, L is in Lima, D is in Delta at gmail.com. I'll put it in chat here too.
So, before we go to questions, should we go over the results of the poll,
Yes,
which
yes,
I'll be
yes.
interested
I
in
want
seeing
to I want to see
Yes,
if
I
it's
want to
still
see.
100% on that one question.
Yeah. Okay, so I will read off the answers here for anybody that joined later on. The questions we asked were, which of the following have you seen? And the first one was a TV show discussing a TV talk show discussing satanic cults, and 48% of people said yes, they have seen that. 17% of people said they had seen YouTube uploads of old TV specials, such as The Law Enforcement Guide to Satanic Cults, which,
So,
as
so
a
what's that?
former
What's
law
that about?
enforcement
What's that about?
officer, I
What's
have to
that?
tell you, I saw that and it is embarrassing on so many levels.
Did you see it because it was part of some training, or did you just watch it on your own?
No, I did not see that as part of a training. I just saw it separately from that. I don't that was not taught to me in any official capacity, although I think that show predated me a little bit, so it was probably
Okay, I
taught
was
to
going to say
people.
they clearly failed. You wouldn't know what to
Yes.
do.
Right. I mean, what if you run into a satanic cult? Although I think I have told the story in a previous hangout of the time I did perform an exorcism on someone's home in my official capacity.
Yes, I do remember that.
Yeah, oh, that was on your episode probably.
Yep, yep.
But I did not receive training in that. So I was kind of left to my own devices there.
So
And
no
it was
training yet,
silly.
yet it worked, right?
I mean, it depends on what you mean by worked. There was not a demon in their
There
home
you go.
after I
There
left,
you go.
Well,
so
clearly you had the power of the Holy Spirit flowing through you.
right. It was obviously that. It wasn't that there wasn't anything there to start with. Definitely not one of the choices.
But yeah, if you haven't seen it, I would definitely suggest looking it up on YouTube. It's hilarious. There's actually VHS copies you can get on eBay too. I kind of wanted to buy one just to have, and I do actually have a VCR, but at the same time, it's like, well, I can just watch it on YouTube for free, so why bother?
Yes. And I mean, to be honest, there are a lot of silly law enforcement trainings from that time frame. And oh, we could do a whole show on how
I
pseudoscience
just
gets
realized there
mixed
might
into this
actually
type of
be
thing.
people on here or listening in the future who don't know what that acronym is, VCR.
Oh,
Video cassette recorder, right?
Yes.
And
yeah.
then VHS would be video home system.
I actually don't know what that stands for, although we
Now,
did
I
have
did
those
not
when I was a
know.
kid.
I did not know that there was something other than VHS like Betamax until a few years ago, because that was before my time.
Yeah, they were
I don't
competitors
know
at
what
the
that
same
is.
time, and from everything I've read, the Betamax was actually a superior technology, but the marketing
Yeah.
sucked, so it went bye-bye.
I think that was that Sony?
Yes.
I don't know. Um, but yeah, you could probably find those on that as well. But YouTube is a good place for them too, it sounds like.
Mhm. Now, unfortunately, a lot of the talk shows um, aren't necessary. Like the Geraldo specials on YouTube, or at least it used to be. But I have not been able to find like the Oprah or Sally Jesse Raphael specials. I don't know if it's just waiting for somebody to have recorded a copy and to kind of do that transfer from uh VHS to digital, but I would love, love, love to watch those someday, And I have a bad habit of, I have a bad habit and a long history of buying very questionable things from eBay, but I kind of turned that to a more positive thing in that I try to buy like whatever kind of weird satanic panic related stuff that I can. So, I'll get like the oddball books, and I've seen a couple like police seminar manuals, like the spiral bound dot matrix printer printed copies, and I'd love to get those, but the kind of prices people are charging for it, it's like, I can't justify that.
They're
Or I would
actually
get,
like
or if my
collector's
wife found
items.
out that I spent that for it, I would be in serious trouble.
That's fair. That's
I
fair. We
think
don't
I
want to break up
actually
any
own
marriages.
Rosemary's Baby on VHS.
Oh yeah. Oh, and that was the other choice on that poll question. Have you ever seen it? And 59% of people said they have seen the movie Rosemary's Baby. I saw that recently, and I have to tell you, I wasn't prepared. I didn't know that's what it was going to be about.
Now, was that
Uh,
the original, or I think they did a remake a
oh, it
couple
was
years
the
ago?
original with
Okay.
Mia Farrow,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
and yeah, I bet there has been a remake, but I went for the original. I like original
Yeah.
uh
Good choice.
on that kind of stuff. Um, okay, let's see. And 14% of people said, "What in the hell are you talking about with satanic cults?" So there's that. Okay, second poll question was, have you ever read a chick track? And only 13% of people said yes, and I used to distribute them. 28% of people have read one. Wow, I thought that number was going to be higher. 3% of people said never. 6% of people are not sure, and 50% said, "What the hell is a chick tract?" I
It's
believe
my
Linda
time.
has
It's
an
my time.
example of one. It's your moment.
Okay. So chick tracts, it's fascinating. They are little pamphlets, little booklets. And if you keep a keen eye out, like at some point you will find one. Some people will sit them like at a gas station pump, like on the gas station or outside of a grocery store, or like on the windowsill somewhere. They like these weird little fairies not distributing fun trinkets and stuff. They distribute these things. So these little pamphlets that it always tells a story. This one in particular is called Big Daddy with a question mark. And we've got like a great illustration. The thing about chick tracts, a variety of different artists illustrate for chick tracts, and some of the artwork is like the most incredible thing you've ever seen. There's even, I want to say there was one about Dungeons and Dragons that
Mhm.
was turned into like a little short film or something. They're fantastic. But so this one has this great non-offensive at all illustration of this teacher talking to some students, these blind followers of evolution, and then this brave, handsomely drawn Christian. Here he is. Here's this chud right here. No, look at me. I believe in Jesus. Anyway, and so it's a little booklet, and you read through, and it's a little comic, like a tiny little graphic novel. Here we got, Darwin over there. And at the end, it tells you that evolution, of course, is just disproving the theory of evolution, and that you need to get right with Jesus. At the end, this is always at the end of like the how to get right with Jesus. And you can send $12.95, including shipping, for a sample assortment and a price list to that address, which I'm not even going to show on the screen for more than a second. But these are, I think I have some more somewhere else, but some of these people, these are collector items. Like the Dungeons and Dragons one, I would love to have. They're hilarious. Like I said, there's some incredible drawings in them, but they're all just little, very unhinged evangelical, like litter,
So
essentially.
I've not heard of these until maybe 10-ish years ago. And when I heard the
Mhm.
name, I thought it was a disparaging word for women, chick tracks. But it's not,
Ah,
correct? So tell us what that means.
Isn't that the guy's last
I think it's the
name that
guy's last
started that?
name who like
Jack
created
Chick,
them. And
yeah.
some of them are like when I say they're shocking, and I mean I've found some and flipped through some that I could not believe how bigoted and racist, like even for like, you would think that they would want to be a little more palatable, like a lot of like the kind of evangelical reach is trying to be as like nice as possible sometimes. Some of this is like straight out of like Westboro Baptist playbook
Oof.
of like nastiness, and it also fully goes into conspiratorial, so much satanic panic and chick tracks, right? Like anything that's not
Yeah.
this very narrow thing is satanic and evil, and so they talk about, yeah, Dungeons and Dragons. It's for those of you, anyone who's not cool enough to know, Dungeons and Dragons is a role-playing game that's it's famous for being like really nerdy or whatever, and it's you like play with friends and you pretend to be magical characters. And it had the same response of this, like Harry Potter did in the 90s, of this is satanic and evil and you got to protect people from them. And there was a famous D&D chick track which was turned into like a little short. I think it really was. It was like turned into like a little short film.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh yeah.
Well,
Oh, that was a thing.
and there was a really famous story, and unfortunately I forget the person's name, but there was like a high school kid that like kind of wandered into these like sewers and died, and or died at an accident or committed suicide or something, and somehow it got turned into this whole big thing about, well, he was kind of the weird quiet loner and he played Dungeons and Dragons, and he must have gotten like too far into it, and you know the demonic influence is what killed him, and that kind of became uh the impetus for the scare. And it kind of spread out from that then too. There's a couple books, I think it's called like Terror in the Toy Room or something like that. But there was this guy that put out these like two books talking about how like 80s cartoons had all these satanic images in it, like the Smurfs are blue because they're dead, and I don't know, there's some crap about Strawberry Shortcake. I don't know how she ties into the devil, but
Everything was bad. Cabbage Patch Kids were named after demons. Teenage Mutant
yep.
Ninja Turtles were bad because they had Asian religion, which is obviously demonic. Oh, every toy that was popular you couldn't get because you
Yep.
were going to get a demon. No matter what it was, you were going to get a demon.
He said, Star Wars was evil because Darth Vader like looks like Odin or something. I don't see that one. And Obi-Wan Kenobi's name somehow relates to like the Obi religion or Obi chant of like Africa, and just absolutely batshit weird stuff. But some people, I guess, believed it.
Oh, my whole church believed it. That this was a whole thing. You couldn't play with anything without getting a demon. It just about, it seemed like. I mean, no one ever got a demon. Weird how like that never actually
I was gonna
happened
say,
in
I
anyone's
I feel
experience.
very cheated because like I've done about everything you can think of to try to invite the satanic in, the real kind of demonic stuff into my life, and like nothing's ever happened.
Ouija board.
Like
Have you done Ouija board?
I have a Ouija board on the wall in my bedroom, and nothing's ever happened. Uh, we've got um, we've got a casket in our foyer. We have Victorian uh casket stands that we use as a coffee table. No ghosts.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Last week we were talking about I went to Helen's house a couple of weeks ago, and she had a Ouija board as well, and we tried to play with it. And let me tell you, when you have three skeptic atheists playing with a Ouija board, that thing doesn't move
Nothing
at all.
happens.
You're all just sitting there staring at it, laughing for a long time until someone's like, "Hey, it'll be funny if we spell this." Yeah, we didn't summon anything. It was we summoned something called like FU underscore, I think, question mark. Um, but nothing happened. Okay, okay, going to question 3 and our poll here. We got to get to the end of this at some point so we can do questions. Which of the following did Christians think the band name KISS stood for? And we are still at 100%. Everyone correctly identified this as Knights in Satan's Service, which I have to confess, until today, I thought that was actually what that stood for. They taught me that. I believed it. I did not know that was not true until just now. But according to Snopes, that is not what the band thought that stood for. That was part of the Satanic Panic, I guess. Wow. And everyone seems to have gotten that message. They were successful with that one. Wow.
Well,
Okay.
as I said in the pre-show, I would have guessed that one just because it seemed to make the most sense. But I actually, and I did think KISS was an acronym, so therefore it would stand for something. But you guys told me it's not even an acronym. They just like to write in all caps, like a certain ex-president.
Yeah, no, I was looking on Snopes just now, and Gene Simmons talks about it and said no. He said, you know, we didn't exactly discourage that once it became a popular belief, but that was never anything to do with their idea for the band, apparently.
Like I say, Gene Simmons is the kind of guy. Anything that's gonna like sell more records, you know, he's
Yeah,
totally for it. But you know,
yeah.
it doesn't. And you know, there's maybe a tinge of anti-Semitism to it too, because I know like Gene Simmons and Paul Stanley are both Jewish. I'm not so sure about the other two members. I know Ace Frehley wasn't. Peter Criss, I'm not so sure about, but
Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting. Well, I'm glad I learned something. I mean, I learned other things tonight too, but I'm glad to know that. I
if there's
often talk about how like embarrassingly long it has taken me to realize like things I got indoctrinated with as a child and didn't realize until years later. Oh, shoot. That was something that the church taught me that was wildly false, and I was carrying that around all this time. So this was another example of that. And so I'm
so
glad to have
if
jettisoned that one.
nobody like takes anything else away from tonight, we at least all know Kiss is just Kiss.
Yeah, it's okay. It's not Knights in Satan's Service.
No.
And on that note, let's hear about which TV show featuring demonic entities is everyone's favorite. And let's see, The Good Place won out at 20%.
Wow.
Closely followed by Lucifer and Buffy the Vampire Slayer at 17% each. And wow, trailing behind, I'm kind of surprised by this. Good Omens and Supernatural were distant at 3% apiece. Wow, I love both of those, but I guess it was a good list of fun demonic content. And actually, I should say, additionally, 37% of people picked something else. So we didn't even capture all of the good demonic shows. Apparently, people have put several of them in the chat.
So when I was helping construct this poll, I did a Google search, and I was quite shocked at how many shows there actually are. There's a whole entire Wikipedia category, TV shows concerning demons. And if I can find that from my list, I will put it in the chat.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I think you put it in the Google outline.
Oh yeah, there we go. Okay, so
Yeah.
I'm putting it in the chat, and for people who just want to look this up later by Googling it on Wikipedia, it's just called category demons in television. Demons in for TV. That
I
sounds
love
like a
it.
movie, isn't it?
It does. Okay, so oh yeah, and I forgot to mention, yeah, one person selected. I only watched the Trinity Broadcasting Network, which I'm not sure if that was ironically selected or not. If it was serious, you're welcome here. Anyone is available, or welcome to come. But I something we talked about in the pre-show was at the church school that I went to. It was actually in the same parking lot property as the business offices and broadcasting center of the Trinity Broadcasting Network, and their building was a replica of the White House, complete with a Oval Office inside and everything. And that building is still there in Irving, Texas to this day, although I'm not sure it's still in use. It seems to be pretty run down. But that was a thing. Okay, let's go to Q&A. What do you say?
Do it.
All right. Okay, so here's a fun question. Someone is wondering, they said the Satanic Panic created several examples of Satan meant to scare the viewer, and that sometimes backfired into making Satan look amazing. Has this happened to you? And if so, what is your favorite piece of such propaganda?
Oh, I mean, I think that's been happening for a very long time. There's kind of a long-standing academic debate with the poem Paradise Lost as to what exactly was John Milton's intent in writing that. Did he intend to show Lucifer as a sympathetic character, or you know, did he have to write him that way because of the nature of a Greek tragedy and making a compelling character? But you're still kind of supposed to know that he's full of himself, and everything's kind of his fault, problem wise. Um, so I think that definitely continues to be a problem. You kind of have to, on the one hand, make the devil a convincing enough enemy, but in so doing, you can run the risk of making him look too cool. Um, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of different kind of portrayals that I enjoy. I mean, the first kind of one that comes to mind for recent memory is a movie, Devil's Advocate, with Al Pacino and Keanu Reeves, where
Ooh,
Al
yeah.
Pacino, of course, is the devil. Um, he has a very kind of snarky, cynical kind of attitude, and a lot of the things that he says are really kind of on point. Um, you know, for me personally, I mean, I was always fascinated by villains in the media growing up. A lot of the cartoons and stuff I watched had Tim Curry voicing the villains, and he's got such a sexy, compelling kind of voice. And characters like Scar in Lion King, for example. The villains just end up being the most kind of interesting and well-rounded characters in media. So there's kind of a certain uh flirtation with that. But yeah, as far as the devil being portrayed in something, that's kind of the one that pops up uh mainly in my head, would be Al Pacino and Devil's Advocate. So if you haven't seen that, check it out. It's a really good film.
Oh, totally agree. That was one of those films that I watched secretly when my brother and I would like go to our dad's house, every other weekend, and they had cable, and we would, turn it on and watch movies we were definitely not allowed to watch. And I remember that was one that we saw that I was completely shocked and horrified by, but very fascinated. And rewatched it recently, was like, yeah, that's still good.
Um, and like to bring up Rosemary's Baby as an example, the kind of great thing about that film is, obviously, I don't know if how much I want to spoil it, but obviously what happens to Rosemary is bad, but the way the Satanists are portrayed in the movie, it kind of ends up being disarming, I think, because they are not portrayed as the kind of hooded menacing figures that are out to, sacrifice people to Satan. They're kind of your more, friendly cookie grandma, and the friendly little old man that's your neighbor that says hello and kind of chats you up in the hallway. And that's, I can tell you from personal experience that is 100% a lot more accurate, true to life than the kind of depictions that you're going to get in media.
Yeah, that's fair. All right. Hey Rob, do we have another question?
Well, I'm pretty sure I know the answer to this, but I will ask it on behalf of whoever wrote it in. Are there real Satanists? Are there Satanists in the real world?
So if by Satanists you mean people who follow the religion of Satanism as codified by Anton LaVey, absolutely. You're, looking at and or listening to one of them right now. I'm also a member of the Church of Satan. You don't necessarily have to be a member of the Church of Satan to be a Satanist. You just read the literature and kind of see yourself reflected in the philosophy.
Also this one, my background there.
Well, that I won't address unless it comes up specifically as a question. I was gonna say I have a membership card, but I don't have it with me, and I wouldn't necessarily show it either because I don't want like my legal name to be out there. But if you mean Satanist as people who worship the devil as a literal being, no, I wouldn't call them Satanists because Satanism is an atheistic religion. I would call them devil worshippers because they're essentially heretical Christians. You can't believe in a literal devil without believing in a literal God. And, once you kind of have those two components, you're just a Christian that's playing for the other side, So, yeah, there are people out there that genuinely believe in a devil and worship him, but in my experience, they're a handful of oddball individuals. There's nothing like a vast cult or a conspiracy of people like that.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, that for people to actually be this group that Christians are afraid of, they would have to actually believe in the Christian God as well as the Christian Satan and be choosing to follow the bad guy in the story,
Yeah.
while believing all of the mythology, the biblical mythology, to be true,
Which
literally.
makes no sense because, he's the loser in that mythology. And,
Right.
Any Satanist worth their salt, we don't, we don't see ourselves as losers. We don't want to be on the losing side. Who does?
Yeah. And so, do you want to talk at all about that? And I know there's both the Church of Satan and the Satanic Temple, but what exactly is that, if not, and we know it's not, the thing that was portrayed in the Satanic Panic of the 80s and 90s? Do you want to explain a little bit in more detail about what it is?
Well, the Church of Satan, for one, isn't isn't a place. It's not, a building. There's no church or temple where we all kind of congregate on Sundays. It's more of an idea, a loose network of like-minded people who share the philosophy and share an appreciation for the organization and have chosen to kind of align themselves with it and be members. Um, for the most part, most members don't get together for public things, but we can share mutual interests and correspond with one another, collaborate on uh, mutual projects. But really, the religion is about self-empowerment. It's about getting the most out of your life because you recognize that there's no God, there's no kind of afterlife that's going to be kind of a second chance for you. We are animals who are mortal and we're going to die one day. this is pretty much it. This is the only chance that we're going to have. So, we want to get the most out of life while we can live it. So, some people live their lives very kind of publicly as Satanists. Other people, you would never know. It could be the neighbor next door and you would never know because they keep it under wraps. I like to think that I kind of skirt a middle line. I'm not necessarily out banging the drum about it, but I put content out there in the public that if you're looking for it, you can find it. So it's not completely a secret. But it all depends on what you want to get out of life and how you choose to enjoy your life as to whether or not you want to kind of disclose it publicly. So the idea in the Satanic Panic is that these groups are operating in secret because they're nefarious, they're up to no good, but at the same time they have members who are kind of at all the echelons of power, and all the members kind of work together towards whatever this mutual goal is, whether it's um kidnapping women to rape them and have them breed babies for sacrifice, or whatever kind of evil plan they have. And that's just completely nonsense. There's nothing like that that's going on.
So, what would you say? And I know I'm going off the rails here with the follow-up questions, but now I'm curious. What attracts you? Like, given that this is an organization or a group that is literally and figuratively demonized in a larger society, what draws you to it? Why are you a member of the Church of Satan?
Well, I always had an interest in the kind of darker aspects of culture, the demonology in Christian mythology, the occult. And there was a time where I really wanted to kind of believe that stuff was real. And then I found the Satanic Bible. Um, and I'd kind of heard about the Church of Satan and stuff through like rock music, with Marilyn Manson having been kind of given an honorary priesthood back in the late 90s before Anton LaVey died. And people kind of associating rock music with the devil and everything. And when I finally got a copy of the book and read it, it wasn't what I expected at all. It was very down to earth, pragmatic. And, even though it very unapologetically talks about magic as being something that the Satanist can use to kind of influence events, not necessarily anything supernatural, but something that's not quite understood yet by science. Even though it had that, it was certainly a lot different from the kind of musty medieval grimoires that I had read. I read Barrett's The Magus. I read the Occult Philosophy of Cornelius Agrippa, all these other kind of medieval works. And, it just was all so much gobbledygook to me. It didn't make any sense. And nothing ever that I tried ever happened. I never had any kind of like magical epiphany or any kind, the heavens didn't open up and angels didn't communicate any kind of hidden wisdom to me, but reading the Satanic Bible for the first time, it really kind of clicked with me. And I understood that as somebody who had always kind of felt like an outsider and been attracted to the kind of darker aspects of culture, I saw the role of the devil in Christian mythology and the role of that kind of figure in human society at large as a positive one, in the sense that the villain's the kind of person that challenges things and kind of uproots convention. He's kind of the one that disturbs the status quo. And I very much appreciated that, and I very much appreciated the very rational and pragmatic philosophy that I found in the Satanic Bible. So when I kind of got involved in the scientific skepticism, I I immediately kind of came back to that and saw that if a certain kind of Christian nationalism, anti-science, anti-evolution, very much, the Bible is the true and infallible word, and that's all we're going to teach, you know, if that was what was kind of being presented and the devil stood in contrast to that, then to me it made perfect sense that the devil would be that kind of figure of the Enlightenment, as like John Milton wrote him and Mark Twain came to understand him. And that would be kind of the metaphor and the symbol for that kind of skeptical attitude and questioning, instead of just kind of accepting the religious dogma at face value.
Yeah.
So I hope that made sense. I feel like that was a very long and winding answer.
No, but I think that made sense. It made sense to me that it's kind of
Okay.
it's taking on the figure of Satan as a metaphor, but also as kind of a countercultural sort of emblem of pushing back
Yeah,
against.
because the original Hebrew for Satan literally translates to accuser. And going back to like the Jewish tradition, there wasn't a singular entity called Satan. Satan was kind of more of a role that individuals filled. So, for example, in the story of Job, you have this character of Satan that's kind of going to God and almost making this case where, yeah, your servant Job, like, yeah, he's great and he's the most faithful guy and all that. But he's only like that because you're so good to him. I bet if you took all that shit away, he would totally curse you to your face. And God, being the benevolent being that he is like, I'll take that bet, and I'm going to drop a house on Job's kids, and I'm going to stricken him with leprosy. And so the devil in that, or Satan in that story, isn't this kind of evil character who's like opposing God. He's just somebody who's kind of pointing the finger at humanity and kind of accusing humans of not having a kind of genuine faith towards God. So kind of taking the idea of Satan back to that original Hebrew concept of accuser, I think that makes perfect sense for scientific skeptics who are not just kind of responding to claims of the extraordinary or the paranormal, but saying, okay, well, show me the evidence, let me see it, and kind of putting the burden of proof literally back on the claimants.
Yeah. Awesome. And we have so many other questions that are great follow-ups to that. And I think we have maybe time for one or two more. Um, Rob, do you want to ask one of our other questions that we've collected?
Yeah, this might be a good one to end this segment on. Um, I think the person who wrote it got something wrong, so I'm going to sort of reverse it. How does the satanic panic compare to the current boogeyman of the right? They wrote of the left, or those who identify as transgender. To me, it seems to be the same baseless fear of stealing children and warping their minds, as does the satanic claims.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. And as somebody who happens to be both, you know, I guess I kind of embody that that fear in a very real sense. I think it's that's kind of why I brought it up at the beginning as a very clear example of moral panic. Um, if the idea of uh, satanic cults as hooded robed figures is maybe a little cliche now, I think it still definitely sneaks its way through um in the idea that drag queens and transgender people, are perverts who are looking to kind of corrupt and abuse children. And the key thing is that it's always children that are kind of at stake, because who doesn't love kids? Children are kind of the most precious part of a society. So if you can convincingly paint a certain group as being a direct threat to children, it's very easy to not only kind of justify the way that you treat them, but also anybody that kind of tries to get in your way or criticize you, you can very easily kind of turn it on them as, well, you don't care about kids, or, you're just as bad as they are. That was one thing that happened a lot during the Satanic Panic, with people like Elizabeth Loftus, or there was a gentleman by the name of Bob Hicks that wrote a really good book. I can't think of the name of it off the top of my head, but basically it was a big book about the police and law enforcement's perspective on satanic ritual abuse. These people, for kind of voicing skepticism at the kind of ridiculous claims, were labeled as, well, you're part of the conspiracy, not just that you're in the way, but you're actively part of the conspiracy. So, I think there's a definite parallel, and the same kind of tactics that were used back then are being used today.
Was it In Pursuit of Satan, the police and the
Yes.
occult?
Yes, thank you. Because I had it here, but I didn't want to have to go digging through stacks of books to find it.
Is that on your book list, Kara, of the bazillion books you need to read?
It probably is now. I have not read that one previously, and as usual, I have added several books to my Goodreads wish list tonight, and I'm never gonna catch up, y'all. It's not gonna happen, but
Yeah,
I'm gonna keep trying.
Yeah, it's somewhere. It's somewhere over there. It's a pretty big book. There's an article that he wrote for, I'm pretty sure he wrote an article for Skeptical Inquirer as well. And you can kind of find a condensed version of the book as an academic paper that he wrote. So if you Google his name, I'm sure you'll find it. The book's worth having, but if you don't have time to read like a huge thick hardcover book.
What were you saying, Autumn, about them vilifying anyone who looks like they're a danger to children? I would go as far as to say now they're doing it. If you can't have children or don't want children, you're also not a good person, right? I think I've heard that in the news recently.
And JD Vance, of course, with his whole
that's where I heard it.
Cat ladies comment.
That's where I heard it.
And he's fucking weird, But it's really
I've heard that too.
To go on a bit of a tangent, it's ironic that he would say something like that when he's like fucking Lazy Boys and other kind of sofas.
Well, so that's just a made up thing, as I understand it.
It is.
The interesting thing I have heard is he came out as gay as a youngster and was convinced by a preacher that he's not, and that never really works.
So allegedly, there's photos of him circulating, dressing in drag. I don't know if they're real. I haven't kind of verified that, but it wouldn't surprise me. I don't know how much that directly ties into the Christian idea. I think it's called like the quiverful moment. But basically it's kind of a really kind of primitive strategy of outcompeting your rivals. If you can fill the world with more kids that think the way you do, the idea is that you can probably shape society to be the way that you want it to be. So if secularists on the one hand are supportive of birth control and women's right to choose, it kind of makes sense that Christians are going to be against that, because one, there's a longstanding history of patriarchal misogyny in Christianity. The idea that God is a man, and that the man is kind of the center of the family and makes all of the decisions. But on the other hand, I think now there's probably also a certain kind of draconian strategy to it, in that, well, if all the atheists and the humanists are not having kids, then if we have a lot of kids, we can outlive, even if we don't outlive them, we can at least kind of like take things back in a few generations.
The only flaw in that logic being the assumption that queer people have queer kids and straight people have straight kids and Christians have kids who grow up to be Christians and
Yep.
atheists only have kids who grow up to be atheists, and that's not necessarily how that works.
Yeah. Well,
But I digress.
try pointing out that flawed logic to them and see how, open they are to it.
Oh, not at all. I know, in my own family, I have one parent, the religious one, who constantly, as she says, claims the scripture verse saying that if you train up a child in the way he should go, because, the only children that matter are men,
Mhm.
he will never depart from it. And so that if you just raise your kids to be evangelicals like you, they will continue to be for the rest of their life. And
We'll have to
as is
ask Gail Jordan how that went.
yeah, it turns out it doesn't go always or often. But so on that note, we should probably wrap up and bring Gail on here to wrap us up here in just a second. And before we do, I just want to say thank you once again to Autumn and everyone else for being here and this amazing episode. And I'm looking forward to our hangout here in just a second. This has been fantastic. I loved it. I learned a lot. Also, I learned a lot about rock and roll, which is a great, takeaway as well. So thank you, Autumn, for coming back and being with us again.
Thank you very much for having me.
Yeah, anytime.
And if anybody has any questions that they're dying to know the answer to that, I didn't get to, feel free to reach out to me, in any way, shape, or form.
Excellent. And are you available to stick around at all for the hangout?
Sure. Yeah.
Awesome. Okay, because we did have several questions that were great questions that we just didn't get to. So if you asked a question and we didn't get to ask it yet, stick around with us for the hangout and we'll try and get to all of them. And also, don't forget to join us again next week. We're here every Monday. And also next week, we have joining us, this is kind of a big deal, Dr. Stephen Hassan talking
I know that
about
name. I'm always
yeah.
using it. Didn't he invent some model or something that we always talk about?
Something like the bite model.
That's it.
Yeah, we've talked a lot of times about cults and mind control, and Dr. Hassan was the person who coined that model for thinking about cults and how they influence people's way of thinking. And he is going to be here with us next week. And I want to let everyone know who's here this evening to show up early for that one, or well, show up on time. But we normally have about 15 or 20 minutes of introduction at the beginning of the show where we talk about RfR and what we do here. And so I know a lot of times people join a little bit later in if they've heard that a few times, but that is going to be a little bit shorter next week because Dr. Hassan obviously has a lot of claims on his time and he has a limited amount of time to be with us. So we are going to be starting very promptly next week with just a little bit of introduction, and we'll go over all the things we offer later on in the show. But get here early next week to hear all of Dr. Hassan's presentation, and of course, it will be available online afterwards too. So you're not going to miss it if you do. But be here for that. It's going to be a good show. And in the coming weeks, we also are going to have several really good episodes. I think I'm excited about some of the talks we have coming up. We have David Teach Out and T. Rogers, some of our secular therapists, joining us to talk about death care and the workbook that was mentioned in one of our previous episodes about thinking about death and dying. We also have Nick Dallett coming to talk to us about how to have impossible or seemingly impossible conversations on difficult topics. It's going to be really good. I've heard portions of this presentation and it's amazing. And some other people we have coming up after that are Phil Ferguson, we have Rebecca Hensler, we have Forrest Falkai, and we have our own Helen Green coming up in about a month from now as well. So come join us again next week and the following weeks. And Rob, where can people find us online?
Well, you can follow us on many of the social medias. Facebook, of course, we're at Recovering from Religion on Facebook. There is also a specific support group page on Facebook, which is RfR Support Groups Project. We are on that thing where they have excretions. They used to be tweets, but now it's X, so they're excretions. RfR.org on X. Instagram, we are RfR.org also. And we're even on TikTok, which is at Recovering from Religion. And as I said before, if you missed any of our 201 episodes that are now on a YouTube channel, you can find them all there. They're on our YouTube playlist.
Awesome. Yeah, please check those out. And finally, don't forget that all of the programs that we offer are staffed by volunteers. And we have found that healing can also come from helping others. And a lot of our volunteers find meaning and purpose through volunteering with us. I know I love it. I find it to be more meaningful than a paid job. And also, we have really cool people here that we get to work with, like Rob and Gail and Glinda and Helen and Nikki and everybody else who we get to the privilege of interacting with. So, if that is something that you are interested in helping out with, please feel free to check us out. On our webpage, we have a volunteer tab, or you can just go straight to recoveringfromreligion.org/volunteer to learn more about what volunteering entails and how to apply. And you don't just have to staff those kind of public facing services that we talked about, like the helpline or doing the podcast or anything like that. We also need a lot of help with behind the scenes things too. If that is more your jam, we will find a place for you, whether it's finding and vetting good resources for volunteers or helping to moderate the online community, or maybe it's hosting a support group or helping us with IT support or whatever it is. If you have a skill or a desire to help, we probably have a place for you. So check us out. Oh, also, I am being reminded to mention that we have a new video on our main page talking about what we do here at RFR. Rob was integral in putting that together. So if you want a quick video describing what goes on here and potentially where you can get involved, check that out at recoveringfromreligion.org. And it's the video called What We Do. So with that said, let me turn it over to our executive director, Gail Jordan, and producer of also our senior troll stomper. So she's done a lot here. And I have to allow you to unmute. I am being told that you may have lost unmute privileges. So how about now?
Now that's much, much better. Thank you, Tara. Thank you so much. Everyone, thank you for coming. Autumn, what an incredible presentation. It
Thank
is the
you.
highest honor for someone who values education like I do to say that week after week after week, I learned something from RfRx. I don't want to come away from any of these meetings without having learned something, and I learned a lot tonight, along with Rob.
Thank you.
The KISS thing, the little bit of KISS trivia that we didn't know that Rob didn't know. But more than that, the history behind all the satanic panic and what happens. And that was fascinating presentation. And I'm so grateful that you joined us tonight. Thank you to everyone else for attending. We always want to thank our behind the scene folks. There are so many people that put this together. Those things appear on YouTube and they appear in our podcast spaces, but they don't do that without a lot of work. But it is an awful lot of fun. If you want to join the fun team, the volunteer team, we'd love to have you. And I always try to say this when I talk about volunteering. You don't have to wait till you're all the way through recovering from religion, the journey, not the organization, to join us. None of us were all the way through by the time we came around. It's a process. And so don't feel like you're waiting until you get finished. We can help you with that a little bit. One of the things that helps us grow and develop is reaching a hand behind us and helping someone else. So consider that if you would. If volunteering is not your bag, and I get that, and you don't really want to do that, also considering being a partner with us with donations. We're of course a 501c3. We're a nonprofit I hope you stay and enjoy the hangout. Once again, Autumn, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for a wonderful presentation. Thank you to our volunteers. Have a nice evening, folks. See you next week.
Everybody.